the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues. My, oh my.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's go.
All right, welcome into another edition of the Future Star Series Plus podcast. I'm your host today, Joe Doyle, in the host seat on this fine Friday afternoon. Jason Churchill taking a sick day. He's not sick. We know he's not sick. Jason's being lazy. No, I'm just kidding. No, welcome into another episode of the FSS Plus pod. We got a good show for you guys lined up today. We're going to be talking about a number of different issues, not limited to the Astros and the New York Mets and what their offseason might look like. But on top of that, we're going to talk a little bit about my draft rankings that came out this week at Future Stars Series Plus and kind of dive into exactly what changes were made and why. Casey Bellon, my producer and co-host extraordinaire in the co-pilot seat. My friend, how are we doing today?
Man, I'm excited about the World Series tonight, aren't you?
I'm pretty pumped. Evan Carter batting third.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Talk about a guy drafted as an unknown. I mean, the Rangers were ripped apart by talking heads on the internet and on TV when that happened, but an unknown. And now he's batting third as a 21-year-old, I think, in the World Series. That is nutty, man.
Yeah, I can't believe that Evan Carter has come along as far as he has in one season. And, you know, this hasn't been he's been in the majors for 2 or 3 years, gotten some at bats. And then it kind of clicked for him. It's 1 year. 1 year. Pretty impressive.
Yeah. Can we give the Rangers, like, I hate to do it, but it needs to be done. There's this false narrative going around that they spent their way to a World Series. And listen, they're not here without Corey Seager. There's no doubt about it. And he was an outstanding sign. But can we just list off some of the guys that they have developed in-house? I mean, for all intents and purposes, Jonah Heim was homegrown. He was acquired, but he was homegrown. Josh Young, homegrown. Nathaniel Lowe, he was refined and polished in Texas, right? I mean, I know that he came from, I think he came from Tampa, was it? But they've turned him into a potential all-star first baseman. Evan Carter, fantastic. Adolis Garcia, they took a flyer on him and they fixed it. They made it work. They developed that player, Leody Taveras. So, I mean, a lot of this team was developed in-house. Yeah, I mean, they strung it together in-house. Now, the complementary pieces of Eovaldi and John Gray and Haney and Scherzer to a lesser degree at this point in the season. Obviously, they paid for those, but what team hasn't paid for some players? I just think we need to point out that the Rangers did not buy a World Series appearance. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they've added around that core that they did buy, and then also that they brought up and just added the perfect sort of role players around them. Leclerc, look at that guy. I mean, he's done just out of the bullpen what he's done for them in the playoffs alone. I mean, without him, I don't know that they get past Houston. So just done a great job of add supplementary players to build around that core.
But that's the key, right? I mean, you look at some of the teams that haven't succeeded, the Mets, the Padres, to a lesser degree, the Padres, and to a lesser degree, the Yankees. The Rangers have key pieces on this roster, in this lineup, that they've developed, that are homegrown, that are controllable, that are cheap. And that, there's not a lot of that with the Mets. And there's less with the Padres, and there's even, I mean, you got Aaron Judge and some young players coming up with the Yankees right now that should pay dividends, but there's just not a whole lot of major league regulars on any of those rosters that were developed at home. So kudos to the Rangers, kudos to the Snakes for making it to the World Series. Excited that I guess a Cinderella, right? You don't see Cinderellas in Major League Baseball too much, but just a total sleeper outlier, one of the teams that you probably expected least had a chance to get to this point when the playoffs started, has reached the World Series. That's really, really exciting and easy to root for. But I want to kind of shift gears here a little bit.
Can we get
jump
a game
into
one
our
prediction?
a game one
one
prediction.
prediction. We got Zach Gallen, Nathan Eovaldi tonight.
Yeah, Gallen hasn't been tremendous in the playoffs. Merrill Kelly has just, put that team on toe, and I think he's probably going to get the ball at game 2. Zach Gallen, I think he's sporting about a 5.5 ERA in the playoffs at this point. Could be wrong on that. Don't quote me on it. I will say
5.24.
I'm going to give 5.24. Okay, I'm going to take Texas in game 1. I think Eovaldi has kind of put it together here in the playoffs after kind of struggling down the stretch. And I just think you pointed this out. Kudos to you. You pointed this out, 3-4 weeks ago. It's just an offensive juggernaut. There's nowhere to hide. They're balanced. They hit. They take walks. They don't steal many bases. But in terms of like showing a spot in the lineup where you can take a deep breath as a starter, there's not a lot of those opportunities. So I will say Rangers 7 and D-backs 3, which is a pretty big win in Major League Baseball, especially in the World Series. But what do you got, Casey? I got 7-3 Texas.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking the same thing. I think you're right. I think Eovaldi, like you said, man, he's just really turned it on in the playoffs. And overall, the Rangers pitching staff really, as a whole, has turned it on in the playoffs. And so if we're talking about a team that, obviously their strength is hitting, but all of a sudden they're pitching really well, that's a problem. And it's been a problem for every team they've faced. So I'm going to roll with the Rangers tonight. I think game 2 could be more competitive.
I'm with you on that. Do the Snakes need to run a whole bunch, kind of like they did against the Phillies, to have a chance in this series? Because, Carroll was on the run. Ketel Marte had a bunch of big hits, and then they kind of dink and dunked their way to 4 runs a game against the Phillies. Do they need to run and test Jonah Heim and test Mitch Garver a little bit to kind of get the Rangers on their heels here?
I think it'll just add a different dynamic to the game. I think they need to surprise Texas a little bit with their athleticism, throw them off balance, the pitching specifically, because Eovaldi's a veteran and it's going to be tough to shake him. But if you can start stealing bases, he might be missing some pitches while he's peeking over at you at first. That kind of stuff could help them. I didn't see that. I think Ketel Marte tweaked looked like his groin or his hip or something at the end of game 7. So hopefully that doesn't affect the series at all, because it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, really quick sidebar. If you would have told me Nick Castellanos was going to go 0 for 24 to end his season, boy, after the game that he had, that would have stunned me. Casey, do you want to jump into a little bit of draft rankings? We've got 28 teams that are on the outs, looking forward to 2024 and the 2024 draft. I'm assuming you've had a chance to kind of at least poke around with these draft rankings a little bit and kind of prepare yourself for what that might look like. So kind of what are your overall thoughts here?
Well, my first thought was Kurtz. He's number 1 on your list. A first baseman, obviously, bat first, average on defense. But what are your thoughts on him being able to be a Bryce Harper level-ish bat, a generational bat, so to speak? Is he there? Is that why he's at 1 as a first baseman for you? Is he to that level? Is there that potential there?
So I think there's the potential there. I want to kind of go over some of the numbers that brought me to this point. The reason I've got Nick number one is because he's done it 2 years in a row. Last year with Wake, his bat to ball skills actually took a step back. So he went from 82% contact in 2022 as a true freshman to 79% as a true sophomore. Now his chase rates went down and his batted ball data looked better, but because of that, I don't know if he's going to put up like a batting average slash line from a guy like a Bryce Harper, and he's obviously not going to provide, at least early in his career, the defensive value and the base running value that a guy like Bryce Harper can command. But a guy like, I've seen comparisons to a guy like Matt Olson, and probably not this 2023 version of Matt Olson, because what do you have, 56 homers? Like, let's be real.
Yeah.
But if you look back at like what Matt Olson was in terms of, his control years in Oakland, we're talking about a guy that hit 259, 247, 267, 271, and anywhere between 25 and 40 homers a year while playing a good first base. I kind of see that here with Kurtz. He's got a really powerful swing, leverages hard into the ground. There's a lot of loft in it. And it's kind of the same. He kind of lags the bat similar to the way that Matt Olson does. So you got to be really good, man, as a first baseman to go number one. You got to be as surefire a bet as there is to go number one. But he can run a little bit. It might be an above average glove. He can certainly hit. He's got a discerning eye. There's a ton of bat speed. He's got a chance to be an all-star level first baseman. So because of that, he moves up to number one.
Yeah, really interesting. I thought, first thing when I hit the rankings and popped in there was, okay, first baseman at number one. Not that it really surprised me, but you automatically just know that means that the bat has to be pretty spectacular. So, yeah, no, that's great. Give me, I know we've been talking about this class is college loaded. All right. Give me the highest ceiling college pitcher in the early rounds that you've got.
I mean, I think it's got to be Brody Brecht out of Iowa. Former wide receiver, 6'4", 210 pounds, up to 101. Throws a 93 mile an hour slider, throws an 86 to 87 mile an hour curveball. He's really focused on the changeup this year. It's unbelievable stuff. He kind of reminds me a little bit, and at least in terms of stuff, as to like it's not too dissimilar from Justin Verlander's arsenal with a bit firmer curveball. And whenever you say something like that, you're like, okay, this stuff is better than Justin Verlander's. What are you talking about? No, I think the stuff is really, really big. For Brecht, it's always been, is he going to throw enough strikes to actually, command himself, the ability to start at the next level. This past season at Iowa, he pitched 77 innings and he walked 61 batters. Struck out 109 guys, but that's a lot of walks. And so to give you an idea of how unbelievable his stuff is, I mean, the guy pitched 77 innings and he surrendered 37 hits. Like that's not real.
Yeah.
So on one hand, could it be Justin Verlander-esque? Yeah, I mean, the stuff is there for it to potentially become that sort of a player. Is it more likely that he's like a Pierce Johnson, Ryan Presley type of dynamic reliever who has below average command? I think that's probably the case with a lot of pitchers. But yeah, I mean, he's got the chance to be as good a college arm that we have seen come out since at least Jack Leiter, and Jack had a lot of red flags not involving command. Brody's are a little bit different. So, but I'll tell you, Casey, not to go on a tangent, there's a ton of that in this class. I tweeted about that earlier this week. The amount of high volatility arms that could go in either direction. I mean, I mentioned Brecht. I actually have Chase Burns ranked higher on my board because he's up to 102. It's the same type of 92-mile-an-hour slider. I like his operation more than Brecht's. I think it has the ability to actually stay in a starting rotation, but he's had command issues. And it doesn't really end there. Like Hagen Smith is a lefty out of Arkansas who's been up to 100. Thatcher Hurd up to 99. Who else? Ben Hess at Alabama up to 100. There's a lot. Marcus Morgan at Iowa. I mean, there's so many guys that have top of the rotation upside that could be top 10 picks in this class that ultimately are held back because of command and just general concerns with their ability to pitch 5 or more innings. It's been a while since I've seen this much top shelf college pitching, and I'm really excited to take it in this year.
Do you think there's some good opportunity for teams that are maybe later in the first round to pick up a couple of college pitchers that maybe slid due to the control issues and potentially get out of that elite talent late in the round?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be 2 ways to attack it. You could find elite stuff late in the first round. A guy like Marcus Morgan, a guy like Ben Hess out of Alabama, and you can go for those guys, or you can take the inverse of it, and you can take guys with really, really good stuff and a little bit more polish. I look at a guy like Trey Savage out of East Carolina, Josh Hartle out of Wake Forest, Drew Beam out of Virginia. These are guys that don't have the stuff as some of the top 4 or 5 guys in the draft, but they're pretty good bets to be solid number 3 arms at the next level. All of these guys are 92 to 94 with, a plus secondary and considerable starter traits, command, pedigree. They've got the track record of long innings. And so because of that, like I've said this, you're going to find legitimate starting pitchers who could move quickly as late as the 3rd and 4th round in this class. And I really believe that. I think this is, I would have to go back and actually take a look at some of my old data points, but this might be the best college pitching that I've seen in, at least the deepest I've seen in 6 or 7 years. It's a good crop.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. All right, let's see. One of the things I was really interested in is in terms of backstops. I think your first backstop listed catcher is Jacob Cozart at 14, and then Malcolm Moore at 22, and Caleb Lomavita at 28. Out of the 3 there, who's gonna move the quickest?
That's a good question. I mean, it's got to be Cozart. Well, actually, I guess, not to confuse the listeners, but there's 2 ways to look at this too. Like, on one hand, a guy like Malcolm Moore probably isn't going to catch. He's probably going to move pretty quick as a bat. But on the other hand, a guy like Jacob Cozart is definitely going to catch. So maybe they need to season him a little bit more through the big leagues. I think the bigger question always for catchers in any draft is who's actually a catcher? Like who's got the chops to catch? And I'm not talking like Kyle Schwarber, he got to the big leagues and caught for a year because he's a catcher. I'm talking like who's going to catch for 8 years? We're not going to force a square peg into a round hole. Who's going to catch? And there's not like Jacob Cozart is going to catch. Caleb Lomavita might catch. Derek Bender is 4th on my list. He's kind of like a Mike Napoli, right? It's like brute force, tons of power. There's some arm strength, but not the softest hands. You probably got to go down the board to a guy like Ryan Stafford at Cal Poly. He's probably 9 or 10 on my board to find another surefire catcher. So to answer your question, I think Jacob Cozart probably takes a little bit longer to move up the ladder as he learns the ins and outs of professional catching. But Malcolm Moore's bat has shown flashes of being so good that he could be at the big leagues and produce. He looks a lot like Alex Verdugo at the plate, by the way, kind of sidebar. Malcolm Moore could be a guy that produces some pretty good numbers from first base or left field. He's a really talented player.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's interesting that, there's just, especially for major league teams that are looking for catching, it seems like there's really not a lot of guarantees in this draft.
Yeah. What do you think, really quick, Casey? What are your thoughts on the changing of the meta in Major League Baseball as it pertains to catchers? Like, if you were playing GM for a day and I said, we're going to draft a catcher in the first round, would you be terribly worried about their receiving skills and their framing skills just because the rule changes are coming? Or are you just straight up looking for a guy that's got big power and a huge throwing arm? Like, do you take the right fielder and put him behind the plate, or do you still value, the tools of a good backstop?
I think the difference in what a catcher can make for a pitcher, just in terms of their ability to not just receive, but to understand the game, to call the game, and to have input on defensively on what's going on, is huge. And it seems to me like guys that care about catching truly, and that receive well and put the work in to do that are also the guys that are putting the work into, calling games and understanding what's going on, and understanding how to talk to pitchers. So I think it's incredibly important.
Certainly saw some runs scored by the Diamondbacks actually against the Phillies, because of an inability to hold the runners, right? It's a big part of the game, being able to hold the runners. Now, this wasn't Real Muto's fault ultimately, but I think part of that bigger conversation of holding runners in place is the ability to block a breaking ball. Breaking balls are only going to get harder, faster. They're going to spin more. And the expectation to knock one of those down with the chest plate and keep it in front of you is just going to get more and more demanding. So I do think there is an intrinsic ability for a catcher, like a mindset for a catcher to be able to do that well. We've seen some really good catchers over the year. Real Muto is very, very good at it. Mike Zunino, really good at just keeping the ball in front of them. And there's some guys that struggle with it. And so I think you definitely have to weigh that in terms of, okay, yeah, this guy will certainly be able to hit enough to be a big time regular, and he's got the arm strength to stay behind the plate. But I mean, if he's costing us 3 or 4 bases a game because he can't block a breaking ball, or he's just got hard hands on a fastball up in the zone, I think it's something you got to consider. So good point.
Yeah, it's sort of the not an issue, but it's sort of where Harry Ford is at with Seattle right now, right? Is he going to catch? He's uber athletic. He can hit the ball. He draws walks. Everything says that, Harry Ford is going to be fine at the plate. At the big leagues, of course, we say that until they get there, we don't know. But it's really been how well of not a receiver, but staying in front of the ball is he. And so there's a lot of guys like that. It seems like, you were talking about on your list right at the top, Malcolm Moore, Caleb Lomavita, where it's a question of, are they going to be able to stay in front of the ball and catch for 8 years?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the only thing the rule changes are really changing is framing in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Just whether or not, can you pull a ball into the zone? Can you keep a ball in the zone? Maybe that part goes away, but all of those other pieces, and yeah, it does ultimately dilute the catching position a little bit, but all of the key pieces of being a good catcher, I think for the most part, stand true. Casey, I got a question for you. You're going to be in the general manager seat. Okay. You are running what team do I want to give you right now? Well, I'm going to give you the team that you're most familiar with. I'll give you the Seattle Mariners. Okay. And it's not a bad team to use as an example. The New York Mets might go through a transformational winter. Obviously not confirmed, and they certainly don't need to cut payroll. I mean, they have infinite amounts of money. But let's say they move a Pete Alonso. And I think they've got some options over there. Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, Jeff McNeil. They've got some players that can take the first base bag. So you get 1 year of Pete Alonso. What's his trade value look like? What are you giving up and feeling okay about to acquire a guy like 1 year of Pete Alonso?
Yeah, I think from my organization, I'm willing to probably give up at least one top 10 prospect. And then from the Mets, they are looking to compete still. They're probably going to want at least one MLB guy in that deal. Maybe not, but that would be my guess. And it would probably be pitching. Am I willing to give up a Emerson Hancock, type guy? But probably not, because Pete Alonso, he's not a good extension candidate. He's
already spending.
How old is he? He's 28.
29? Yeah, 29 next year, I think.
29 next year. We saw some signs possibly of decline in 2023, and he could turn that around, but I'm not loving it. He hit 217. We already, as an organization from the Mariners standpoint, strike out a whole bunch. This probably, from the Mariners standpoint, is not the direction they want to go. But just as far as Pete Alonso's trade value, he's probably worth somewhere in that range where you're giving up a top 10 prospect and maybe one more, in your lower 25.
So where does he go?
Type deal.
There are some teams I think that make some sense. And you're right. I don't know if Seattle is, especially for a right-handed hitter with those ballpark dimensions, I don't know if they make the most sense. But what if you're Ross Atkins in Toronto and maybe you want to play around with a DH first base combination there, and they're potentially losing some steam with Brandon Belt. Obviously different players, but if you're Toronto, are you interested in a guy like Pete Alonso? And putting you on the spot here a little bit, but what sort of a move do you make there?
I think that it really depends on what I'm going to do with Vlad Guerrero Jr. And I know that we've talked previously about possibly them trading them. If they don't, I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense for them. They got the DH spot. I think that they could deploy him there and then kind of split time between Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Pete Alonso. But then you're almost tandeming, two guys that last year struggled a whole bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that running into 2024 with two first basemen, whether they're at DH or first base, Alonso's probably, they're probably about equal at first base, really, in terms of defense. I don't know that running out there with that is a fantastic idea. My idea would maybe be Baltimore. You have the pitching and the farm to go get him. They don't want to spend a ton of money, it seems like. So you get, you just won 100 games. You go get an impact power bat that they need, because Santander has been great for them, but a lot of the power is missing. I mean, I think that they have a lot of 20 to 25 home run guys potentially there, but they don't have the 40 home run guy, right? So you add that to that lineup, I think it makes an impact.
I think that's a good call. I think Philly is another interesting call. I don't know what their plan is with Hoskins. I don't know what their plan is with Bryce Harper, whether or not they believe or want to believe that he can play a solid average right field going forward. But, if they do lose Hoskins, that's an interesting way to fill that void. And I don't know, maybe he stays in the NL East. I think there's a lot of teams that would, bend over backwards for Pete Alonso. It's just what complicates it is it's the Mets. Like, they don't have to move him.
Yeah.
They don't have to reset. They don't have to reconfigure. They don't have to do any of that. Money is not an issue with the Mets. So really it comes down to whether or not David Stearns thinks it is a wise baseball move. Because I'll tell you one thing, Casey, no way is Steve Cohen walking into David Stearns' office and saying, I'll let you take a breather in 2024 as long as we compete in 2025. Nobody's taking a $350 million payroll into a season and going, let's make sure we're good next season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What do you think his value's worth in terms of trade? I mean, if you're the Phillies, what are you willing to give up?
Oh man. Yeah, now you kind of got me on the spot a little bit. That's tough. I think ultimately, if you're going to get Pete Alonso, you're going to have to inherently overpay, right? I mean, what good do the Mets have by moving him unless they're getting exorbitant value? So I look at maybe a guy like Orion Kerkering. He came up as a reliever for the Phillies this year. Big fastball, big breaking ball. He's got like dynamic, back of the bullpen upside. I think if you were to get Kerkering and shoot, just something that can fill a roster spot in 2024 that's a little bit more athletic than what you've got right now, I think that makes a little bit of sense. They've got some other guy, Christian McGowan's getting close. Yeah, like I think if you're the Mets, you probably look to get a couple of interesting arms, a couple of interesting like supplementary pieces that help you in places that you struggled in 2023, and you also have to backfill the lost offense. So not an easy thing to do at all.
Yeah,
but
I agree with you there.
Do you think he gets moved?
No, I think they extend him. I think they extend him. I think there was
this winter, huh?
Yeah, I do. I think there was a report, I believe, that came out. Oh gosh, it had to have been. I think it was end of September that they would prefer to hold on to him and extend him. But I think that's them probably trying to tell Pete Alonso that they would like to extend him for less money than he wants if he's willing to stay.
Yeah, what's a fair deal, man? I mean, the home runs are awesome. They are. But he's essentially probably never going to be more than a 3-win player, right? His best seasons are 3.5. So, I mean, just by calculation's sake, what's that, $25 million a year peak? So if you're giving him financial stability,
would you give him like 7 years, $150 million?
I think that's about where I'd be good. What's that? That's about $22.5 million a year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's
I think that's
the range.
I think that's a fair deal. Yeah, I think that's a fair deal. I think he's probably going to want more than that. But
yeah, who's his agent?
7 years is already something I'm uncomfortable with. So
yeah,
I don't want to give him 7 years. I mean, I would probably be more comfortable at 5. I don't think his agency or he's going to accept that, but I'd probably do 5 120 for him, give him 24 mil for 5 years and kumbaya.
How long do you think
you're on the right track?
How long do you think he's until he's a DH too? That's the other question, right? How long is he going to stick at first? We don't know what his decline defensively looks like.
Well, here's my thing with the Mets is and we started this show off with this. The Mets have not done a good job of prioritizing their homegrown players. And I think towards the end of the year this year, you saw some players come up that might not have tremendous positional versatility, but are better at first base than Pete Alonso. Brett Beatty right now is a solid third baseman. He's not spectacular over there, but he's solid. He's a candidate to move to first base. Mark Vientos, I'd like to see him get more looks. And then you've got all the guys in the dirt. Jeff McNeil and Ronnie Mauricio and Francisco Lindor and Luis Angel Acuna is not. He probably is there next year. So I think when you take all of those infielders into consideration, and you take into consideration that I think Jet Williams is probably not terribly far off. We might see Kevin Parada next year as well. He might be a first baseman at the end of the day. I think you're going to have to find a way to get more athletes on the field. It's kind of the New York Yankees syndrome, right? You've got to find a way to get athletes on the field. And because of that, I think Pete Alonso probably only has another year or two at first base before he's taking those Dan Vogelbach at bats.
Yeah. And that's sort of where I'm at too. By the time he's 31, 32, he's probably sitting at DH. All right. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the Astros off season coming up and the Dusty Baker step down. Yeah.
I got jokes.
Okay, let's hear them.
Well, I'm just, I feel for the wristband industry. I don't know how they're going to make up these lost revenues, and it'll be nice with the black plastic gloves being off the board, not watching the OJ trial every night. And I mean that in a total black plastic glove mindset. It's just his whole, by all accounts, Dusty is a great guy. I've never talked to him, never met him, but his appearance is always so strange to me. I don't know how he doesn't choke on a toothpick. He's twirling that thing around in his mouth. How has he never stabbed himself the roof of his mouth? He's got black plastic gloves on every game. He's got neon wristbands every game. It's just such an eclectic look for a manager. But in all seriousness, probably a loss for the Houston Astros. I think he's well liked. I know he's not well liked in the analytics department up there. I know he's not totally well liked in the performance side of the team because, he's one of these grit over analytics types guys. But I think it's going to ultimately be a loss. And how could it not be? You look at the results that they've had year over year over year. They're always in the ALCS if they're not in the World Series. What more is another guy going to do? The roster's getting older. We've been saying that for a few years now, I understand. But the roster is getting older. And there's not a ton of prospects that we see pushing the envelope right now for playing time. I think the Astros are, set to take a step back. But I will say, we'll see what direction this organization goes. But I think it's going to be really telling based on who they hire on the direction they want to go. Is this going to be a Jeff Bagwell, Jim Crane type of hire? Is this going to be a analytics type of hire? Are they gonna lean into what has actually made them great in evaluating some of these players? So, yeah, the toothpick and the neon wristbands and the gloves and everything that comes along with Dusty Baker was always strange to me. But he's a hell of a manager, and he's well respected in the game. And we'll see what the Astros do from here.
Yeah, I think they've got to go after pitching right this offseason. Do you think they are willing to spend more? Or do you think that the farm is probably not loaded with prospects to go and get pitching, not high impact pitching? You'd think that has to come through free agency. And they brought back Verlander. He's got another year, doesn't he, on his deal?
Yeah, he's got one more.
He's got one more year. So, Christian Javier, he's looked okay. But they've struggled to, put together games where the bats don't have to win it for them. And especially in the playoffs this year.
Mm-hmm. No, I would think that they probably would want to go after pitching. I actually don't think it is the biggest need for the team. It's going to be a big need for the team here in a year or two. But next year, they got Verlander coming back. I don't know when that guy's going to fall apart, but they do have Justin Verlander coming back. They have Lance McCullers coming back. He will have essentially missed like 19 or 20 months of baseball. So, they've got him. That's a step in the right direction. Christian Javier is coming back. And then they've got Hunter Brown, who admittedly needs to take a step forward next year, but they've still got Luis Garcia, Jose Urquidy, and Framber Valdez all returning for 2024 and 2025. So I think they're okay in the starter market. I do think they need to develop some young arms, and time will tell who kind of comes out of that. But, I look at a guy like Ryan Presley, Kendall Graveman is going to be gone. Hector Neris, I believe he has a player option for like $8 million. He might be gone. So I think they're going to dip their toes pretty hard into the reliever market. And I mean, listen, if you're willing to spend $60 million on Jose Abreu, I think you can probably make the case that Josh Hader would look pretty good in Houston Orange, no?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you if you thought they might go after Hader, and
Yeah.
it's a valid question, but I don't know that they're going to be willing to give him. I think Hader is going to command probably maybe the biggest reliever contract maybe ever. At this point, I don't know that Houston is going to be willing to pay that. I guess we'll see.
Hard to know. I mean, they've already got $200 million committed to next year. After pre-arb and arb, that's, I think they went about 246 this year. After, for the luxury tax purposes, for just payroll alone, they did 225. I think they're going to absolutely blow that out of the water in 2024. They're going to have to. I mean, they don't have anybody rolling off the books. They're going to have to. So
what do they do at catcher?
Yeah, I mean,
what do they do at catcher?
I think
they
just
do
what
stick
they've
with
done.
Maldonado.
I do. Yeah, I think they really value. I think first of all, I think they value what he brings to the team from a leadership, game calling, and holding the running game perspective. And I think there's a lot of teams that have done quite well with a offensive black hole behind the plate, but someone that does his job. So if it's one spot in the lineup, if it's that guy batting ninth in the lineup that is an automatic out, so be it. But I think they're comfortable with him, and they just traded Corey. What was the name of the kid they just traded to Chicago? Corey. I don't even remember, but their top catching prospect who'd struggled. They just moved him. So I think it's more Martin Maldonado. If I'm being totally honest with you, man, like the biggest question that I have with the Houston Astros is what are they going to do with Alex Bregman? Because next year's it. He's making $30.5 million. And next year is it for Jose Altuve. He's making $29 million. I can't imagine they're keeping both of those guys. I can't imagine. And
yeah.
Listen, Altuve is going to be 36 in 2025. He'll be 35 in 2024. Like he probably signs a 3-year, $80 million deal to end his career in Houston. I think Bregman walks.
Yeah, so you think there's any chance they trade him at the deadline then?
I think there's a chance they trade him this winter.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it's out of the question. That team needs help in some different places, right? He's making $30 million. And Alex Bregman has been good, not tremendous. I wouldn't call him a franchise cornerstone. He's been a really, really good third baseman, and he's a guy that has benefited tremendously from the Crawford boxes. I think you could get a decent little package in return for 1 year of Bregman. So that's kind of, maybe the surprise of the winner. He's 30 years old. He'll be 31 next year. If a team wants to bring him in and sign him to a 5-year, $140 million deal through age 36, maybe you're motivated to go get him.
That almost seems like
look at the Phillies again.
The perfect.
What if the Phillies
or the Phillies
or the Yankees? Yeah, but what if the Phillies were to say, let's move Alec Boehm to first base, let's go acquire Alex Bregman, we'll send the Astros. I mean, name your prospect that they love. They would probably love Orion Kerkering, knowing their the way that they value players with analytics. It's something to keep in mind. I don't know how they replace Alex Bregman, but it's not terribly difficult to replace a $31 million third baseman. There are ways to do it. I don't know. Just thinking outside the box. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Phillies are a great idea. I think the Yankees would be a great idea, and I think they'd be willing to extend somebody like Bregman. They need guys that get on base. They OBP wise this year, the Yankees were bad. I think they were I think they were 5th worst as an offense in OBP this year. That's so they need guys you can have Aaron Judge and you can have Stanton, which that's another conversation, but if you're not getting runners on in front of them, it doesn't matter. So Bregman does a good job of that. They're hoping that Dominguez can do that, but if you can get Bregman at third base and then sort of add from there, I just don't know who Houston would be interested in terms of what the Yankees have, because they're almost looking for the same thing that the Yankees are, guys that get on base and play in the outfield, right? So, it's an interesting conversation.
I'll throw you one more, and then we'll check out of this one, just so we don't go too long for these guys. The Blue Jays are losing Matt Chapman.
That's an interesting one. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
No chance Matt Chapman comes back, you think?
I would just be surprised I guess there's a chance Matt Chapman signs a 1-year prove-it deal, but this is kind of his opportunity to get paid, and he really cost himself a lot of money down the stretch. He was the best player in baseball in April and May, but he was pretty bad down the stretch. Knowing that the Blue Jays have to re-sign Vlad and Bo after 2025, I don't think there's any chance that it makes sense to keep him around. Now, if he wants to sign a 1-year deal worth $20 million to try and show that he was who he was in April and May, and that the hip issues and the back issues aren't an issue, maybe Toronto's interested in that. But at the same time, if he's wanting to make 1 year $20 million, I bet you there's teams that would step up for 1 year and $25 million for someone like Chapman. So I think he's probably done in Toronto.
Yeah, I probably have to agree with you there. All right, we're going to be at Game 6 next Thursday, probably when we get back to you, or Friday. So we will get a prediction, World Series prediction, out of Joe when we come back next week.
I'll give you one now, man. I don't think we're going to see a game. I don't think we're going to see a Game 6.
You think the Rangers are taking it in 4?
5. I don't think they'll sweep. I don't think they'll sweep the Snakes, but yeah, give me the Rangers in 5, and let's catch up next week and see where things are at.
If you had to root for one, though, who are you rooting for?
Oh, the Snakes. The Snakes. I mean, listen, Corbin Carroll. I watched Corbin Carroll as a high schooler. He was phenomenal. I watched, of course, Paul Sewald is one of the easiest guys on the planet to root for, and they're the underdog. And I got a lot of, buddies in the Texas organization, but they're in the AL West. Sorry. I'll celebrate with you guys if you guys win it, but until that time happens, I'm a sucker for an underdog.
Yep. Nope. I'm right there with you. All right. Well, let's let these guys go. This has been the FSS Plus podcast, and we'll see you next time.
So just chill till the next episode. Falling back on that ass, what a hellified gangster lean.